Ah, I have access.
I am Dawn Taylor, and my presentation tonight is about a better user experience. So about me, professionally, I have a background in residential mortgage in various capacities. In IT, I functioned as a programmer analyst, as a business analyst, as a Scrum Master, among other things. And I've been an Access enthusiast since about 1999 when I wrote my first Access application, which is still in use 21 years later. Most recently, since 2016, I have been an independent Microsoft Access and SQL developer. And a little bit more about me. I am a gardener and an amateur genealogist. My Ancestry.com tree has 2,154 members. And as an amateur genealogist, I have found that I have no famous ancestors, but I have had opportunity to murder some family legends. My grandmother always said we were descended from Michel Ney, who was Napoleon Bonaparte's marshal, who history says was executed. But according to family legend, he escaped to America to become progenitor of the Ney line. Well, in reality, we're descended from the MacNays of Scotland, not the Nays of France. And also in my family tree, I found out about a murder that happened in 1920 Alabama. My great-grandfather's second wife was murdered with a fireplace poker. A local Black man was convicted 4 times and ultimately acquitted after being convicted 4 times. And I thought this bore a striking resemblance to To Kill a Mockingbird, which Harper Lee said was inspired by local events in an adjacent county in 1936. In the end, no one else was ever charged, so we don't know who killed her. But if you watch Forensic Files, you know it's almost always the husband. So, uh-oh, Grandpa. And lastly, I joined DAAUG in 2017, and I have been the communications director for 2 years. You can contact me at dawn@mizaccess.com. Or if you're on the East Coast, it's dawn@mizaccess.com, or if you're Lee. Okay, so my topic is a better user interface. So what do I mean by this? I mean that it's not overwhelming, that it's more intuitive, that it gives useful but not intrusive feedback, that it complements the user's workflow. So an example, for instance, of overwhelming. This is a stock out of the box multi-level access tab control. And in this case, you can see that it's quite busy, and each one of these tabs is equally busy. And if that's not overwhelming enough, if you click one of these tabs in the upper rows, the whole row drops down and the bottom 2 rows push up so that your tabs are never in the same place. So for one thing, we have too much going on one screen. We have too much going on one screen. And if you were to use this form, you would find that in certain places you'll make an entry and it will give you an error that says the entry you're trying to make is not compatible with something that you entered on a tab somewhere else. So it's a very convoluted workflow as well. And then the best thing about this is at the bottom it says, please note the profile data is specific to this machine, and any data or settings changes made here will not be applied to other machines and must be replicated to those machines manually. So in this case, I would say that this is overwhelming in quite a lot of ways. And the fact that you would have to do this on every machine that you install this application on would be more than daunting. So in addition to overwhelming, then we move on to unintuitive. And this is both. Again, there's too much going on one screen. Although there does seem to be a workflow, we have little boxes here that tell us number 1, below it's number 2, to the right 3, 4, 5 is to the right, and then we drop down to 6 and up to 7. So there seems to be a workflow with the numbered patterns, but as you can see, a lot of the fields are have pretty cryptic names. And in whole, this seems to be kind of a technical tool, really too arcane and unintuitive for an average user. For an average user, you really want to take them through some kind of a workflow, like a series of input forms, such as which files do you want to rename, and then a next screen, what text do you want to replace, what do you want to replace it with, do you want to include an extension, and so forth. I'm told that this is a pretty cool tool and that it's very powerful, but it's not something that I would provide to the average user. Okay, a little bit about feedback. Feedback default in most applications, Windows client applications, is your pop-up message box. We use this for errors as well as notifications. And in my experience, users often begin interpreting any pop-up message as an error. So whether it's an instruction or an error, they view it as an error. And here's an example of an instruction I got, an instruction notification that a user called me about and said, I got this error. Well, it's actually an instruction for you to go set your report path. But in all fairness, the fact that it's got, a critical stop icon on it to indicate an error probably didn't help the matter much. But the point is that eventually users, when they're presented with pop-up messages, start just trying to dismiss them so that they can get on with their work. And we all do this. Pop-up messages come up, we dismiss it, and just hope that we can get on with our work. Okay, with respect to feedback, we need to talk about something that I call alert fatigue. So even useful notifications might not be useful to the user. Our access stock notifications also can be pretty cryptic, and we'll take a look at one of those later. Too many pop-ups, I think, contribute to this alert fatigue, so that no matter what pops up, user just dismisses it in hopes that they can continue their work. I worked for a mortgage company whose managers were concerned about loan quality. So they got together and they came up with 11 audits that were supposed to run when the loan record opened, so the processor could make mental notes and fix the issues. After a few hundred hours of coding, the audits were deployed, and sometime later, one of the developers was wandering around and happened on a trainee being instructed how to use the application. And it went something like this. click this icon to open the loan application. And then when it comes up, hit enter 11 times as fast as you can. On that note, a word about getting requirements. Managers are not the best source, and user involvement really is key in assessing what the boots on the ground actually need and find useful, and also getting their buy-in on features. Okay. According to Wikipedia, there are 6 UI design principles. They are structure, simplicity, visibility, feedback, tolerance, and reuse. We're not going to talk about all of those today. We're just going to talk about certain elements of simplicity, feedback, and tolerance. So you got off easy on that one. Simplicity is making it simple, making simple and common tasks easy for the user, communicating clearly and simply, and giving good shortcuts that meaningfully relate to longer procedures. So making it clear what they can do, enabling or disabling controls accordingly, and making it clear what they should do next. With good, clear messaging, with visual cues, and some sense of what will happen when they actually do it, either explicitly or intuitively. Feedback informs the user of actions and interpretations, changes of state or condition, and errors or exceptions. Feedback keeps the user apprised, preferably unambiguously, of what they can or should do next. It's relevant and of interest, and again, concise and unambiguous. And the third principle, tolerance, makes it the responsibility of the application to serve the user's needs and not vice versa. So we want flexibility. We want to reduce the cost of mistakes and misuse. We want to prevent errors, and we want to tolerate very varied inputs. We reduce mistakes and misuse by implementing validations as often as necessary to disallow or warn of say, destructive procedures, and to keep the user on track. So today's topics explore some strategies for providing an interface with forms that are interactive but not intrusive, that are intuitive, consistent, interactive, with useful, unobtrusive messaging, and that reduce clicks. We're going to strive for unambiguous presentation and messaging. Excuse me. This presentation is going to be less about style rather than utility. I'm not going to show you how to build a beautiful interface. I'm not going to dwell on things like you have to reduce the number of controls on your forms. You already know all that stuff. Rather, I want to focus on some strategies for keeping the user focused by providing an interface that self-adjusts to the user's needs and preferences, by providing some intuitive visual cues, and by providing feedback that's minimally intrusive. So the intent is not to lay out some hard rules for how to do anything, but rather to inspire thinking about how to improve the user's experience. Excuse me, experience. So in that spirit, I'd like to encourage you to participate with comments throughout. Keep your mic muted and then unmute if you have a comment, but I'd really like this to be more like a conversation than a presentation that you're just kind of stuck with. So off we go. So before I head on to the demo, does anybody have Any questions, comments? Yes, no, maybe so?
Hey, Don,
Yes.
your screen with all the pop-ups was awesome.
You like that? You like those pop-ups?
Those were great.
Thank you.
But
Was that?
I do have something sort of serious here. And I was reading about this recently, that someone was theorizing that complexity is fixed and locked in. And there's certain complexity in various functions that you do, various activities, driving, whatever it is you want to do. Just think of the complexities involved in your body and walking. But what the point of this was that if you make something appear simple, then the back end has to be much more complex.
That's a true statement. It really is.
It is. So the complexity has to be somewhere. If you've got a busy, complex front end, then the back end doesn't have to be so involved. But if you simplify the front end, then it involves a lot more code and a lot more complexity behind the scenes.
That's true. So I'm roping you guys into a whole bunch of work here. Okay. All right. Anyone else before we move on? Okay, let me get to my notes here. So I've got a menu here, and this is fixed. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and change this to a pop-up, because I love a pop-up menu, because the user can just kind of drag this around and park it wherever they feel comfortable. It's always available. And especially if you run your application document window in tabbed mode, or if you're using overlapping windows that are maximized, there's no need to either drill around on a bunch of tabs to find the menu again, or to have a back to menu button on every form. So I'm advocating for pop-up menu. Okay. So first here I have an example of a legacy type access form. It's your standard Geek Green. It has our old sunken fields and chiseled controls. There's no focus on the first field. I have to click in. And the feedback is standard. So this is essentially just math practice. So you add two things together and get a sum, and then you check it. So if I check it, I want to validate that I have inputs in all. And the standard way is to give user a pop-up. So my first addendum is required. My second addend is required, and a sum is required. Okay, so pop-ups. Again, pop-ups. Now, if I give a incorrect response, a pop-up. If I give a correct response, oops, that's not correct, a pop-up. Okay. So the feedback, we're getting feedback, but the messages have to be dismissed. And you notice that the focus wasn't returned to the offending field. So the user has to click back there and decide where they're going. So a better idea might be something like this. We have a fresh color scheme. We have modern flat text fields. You can see that the focus defaults to the first field, which is a clear visual cue about what they should do next. If I try to check my sum now, I get validation messaging actually displayed on the form instead of in the form of a pop-up. So there's nothing for me to dismiss. Additionally, it takes me to the offending field, and also it borders that field in red so that I have no question about what I need to do next. So now, again, focus is set on the field with the issue because my sum is incorrect. And I've given them a visual cue here with a red X as well as bordered the sum with red. And then if I hover over this, hopefully you can see this, my control tip text then tells them what the correct sum is. So using, kind of a lot of the stock out of the box stuff in Access gives us a lot of flexibility to really enhance the user's experience. So now if I correct this.
Hi, Jim Cannell here. I have a question.
Yeah.
Your light speed ahead of, the classical stuff, but I was wondering, when the person put in the 1 or did the check and was missing the 1, why not show them the fact that they're missing all 3 fields rather than just showing them the fact that they're missing the first one?
Yeah, you can do that. And this is, just kind of a way to get you started on that. And certainly you could make a list of all of the issues and present them with that list. Or you can,
That seems
go
a little bit
stepwise.
easier for the user if you do that, rather than having to go through the process.
Yeah, definitely. So essentially, this is to kind of get you thinking about the concept and then giving you a clue about how I carry it out. You might do it differently. But yeah, certainly you want to think about the context and the workflow and tailor your validation and your messaging to that. So, but you're absolutely right. A better way might be to say both of your add-ins are missing or something like that. But I did this in kind of a stepwise fashion, just to kind of give you an idea how this, how you can give the user feedback on issues. Okay, so with the first one, we saw, that the pop-up messages is being intrusive versus here where we're showing the validation text in a less obtrusive way and in a way that the user doesn't have to respond to that and then go to the form and complete the field that's at issue. So the inspiration for this was web applications. So often you go to a web application and you fill out a form and you hit submit and it notifies you that you are missing the zip code. So you scroll 3 yards up in the up the form to find the field, and it's always helpful if it's highlighted with a border in red, so you know that's the field that's the issue, because when you scroll up 3 yards, you can miss it. Our advantage is that we don't have to make our users scroll 3 yards up. We can actually highlight the offending control, give them a message. There's no click back, no dismissing a pop-up, and then we can place the focus in the field that needs attention. So here we've given them relevant, unambiguous feedback in a very in a way that seems very simple to the user, and also keeping unneeded distractions out of their view. So I have an issue here on my second add-in, and as soon as I make an entry in there, the error messages go away in the assumption that the user is curing whatever the issue is. So there you have it. So how do I do this? here's how I accomplish this. If I can get to my code. So how I accomplish this is largely with something that I call control states. And this is a sub that I put in almost every form that I build. And what this does is it allows me to conditionally set form properties, such as add, edit, delete, per user permissions or per data values, and to conditionally set control properties to enable, to lock, their visibility, their format, and even their control text. Depending on the application, you might want to call control states only on form load in the event, for instance, you want to enforce permissions to view or edit. You may want to call control states in the form current event to react to values in the current record, such as, oh, this invoice is paid, therefore it's not editable. You may also want to call control states after certain data entries. And that's what I'm doing in this example, is after each one of the entries into these text fields, I'm calling a control, after certain events that happen with controls. And oftentimes on events such as control receiving a change. So it just depends on what you want to accomplish, but the control states is where you would make a determination what state those controls are to be in. Are they visible or invisible? Are they bolded? Are they outlined? Are they editable or not? So you may want to, okay. So in other words, this is a really good tool to help us give that needed feedback to our user. And I'll walk you through this, my control states sub here. The first part of this is standard in all my control states, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. This is a debug variable. It's a temp var that I set when I initiate the application, and I set it to false, and it's tied to the tags in certain fields. So if I have record key IDs or record set sources that I might want to peek at as I'm doing debugging, then I can turn on this debug temp var, set it to true, and then next time through control states, these fields become visible to me, and I'll show a demonstration of that. In this particular control states, I have a companion sub called set defaults, and this is where I return all of the control properties to their default state. And I found that it's best to return them all to their default state before you go about highlighting and setting messages and so forth. Otherwise, you'll drive yourself crazy with nested ifs. So my set defaults sub essentially, like I said, sets the default border, hides the feedback message, resets the sum field control tip, and then resets control properties. So use a lot of tags to indicate what I want to be operated on. So you can see here, my inputs all have an input tag in them. And some have, and many of these have a lock tag in them. If you use tag like instead of tag equal, then you can stack your tags. And you can have multiple tags in here separated by whatever you want, really. Okay, so here I'm hiding the marks, which are the correct mark and the incorrect mark. Here, I'm making certain things visible or invisible based on debug. And that's kind of duplicated in control states, but I call the set defaults outside of control states in some cases. So when you observed when we had an error in the second add-end, and I made an entry in there, the onChange event went through the set defaults sub to return all of the controls to the default state in order to get them kind of out of the user's field of vision. Okay, and again, locking controls. This is related to, I also use another temp var, oftentimes called allow edit, and typically use this to enforce permissions, read-write permissions in various places. And so depending on a user's permissions, I might set this to lock controls or whatnot. And then finally, I can conditionally clear the inputs here. So if I'm clearing the whole form, if I'm using the clear button, I might want to clear all the inputs regardless of what's in there. And then again, this is enabling or disabling editing. So that's control states. I wanted to also show you how, I'm going to go to a new module, Control-Shift-C, oops. Oh no, it's missing. Sometimes, give me just a moment here. I don't know. Well, I guess I won't give a plug for MZ Tools. Essentially, MZ Tools is an access tool that allows you to insert code snippets, as well as many, many other things. And if you have a chance, go to the DAAUG YouTube channel and check out Phil Ferrero's presentation on MZ Tools in 2019. It's terrific. And of course, MZ Tools is not showing up today. And occasionally that happens. And I've almost figured out why. I'm not quite sure though. Okay, just a couple of other notes about control states. If you use something like this, really, avoid operating on data in control states and really make sure that it focuses on changing and setting up the visual elements of your interface and not operate on data. And also be careful about enabling and disabling controls that might have the focus. I get into trouble a lot for that. Okay. Before I move on, do we have any questions?
Hi, Ms. Tyler. My name is Wei. I have a question.
Sure.
Yes, for the check and the clear, there's an underscore under the C and the R. What's the purpose for the underscore?
Oh, okay. Well, this is people are no longer touch typists anymore. So if I populate my formula, the underscore means that I can use the Alt key and whatever the letter is above that underscore to actually activate that button. And I don't have to take my hand off of the mouse. So I'm going to Alt C now. And it checked. And I'm going to, you see the underscore under the R. If I Alt R, it clears. Okay.
Yeah, that's really amazing. How did you set that up in the button?
That is stock out of the box access stuff. Whoops, I just resized it. And it's really just this crazy thing where you just put an ampersand prior to the letter that you want this underscore to happen under. It's a VB thing.
I understand that now. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, any other questions? Oh, I guess yeah. Okay, so we talked about, I'll show you debug here.
Earl's out here. Got a question as well.
Sure, go ahead.
You mentioned a third-party library, I believe. Are you using any other third-party libraries? I'm not sure if I'm missing it when you're switching between native functionality and third-party functionality.
Okay, most everything you're seeing right now is stock out of the box because I don't have the MZ tools add-in. I do have like find and replace. I'm not even seeing that now. Oh. Yeah, sometimes. Does anyone else ever have the experience that your add-ons disappear? Your add-ins disappear? Okay, just curious. Might be just me. Okay, so I want to show you how this debug works. Remember I told you there was a text field up here and one down here that were debug fields, and control states only operates on this particular tab. So you see here that I have debug off, and if you're going to use debug, you're going to have something somewhere that you're going to be able to toggle it. So I just toggled it on, and if I leave that tab and come back, then you see that the fields that I marked with the debug tag are now visible. Because in control states, I told it if temp bars debug is true, then make these visible. Now I'm going to turn it off and I'm going to return, and now they are no longer visible. Same concept with the allow edit. That was also another temp bar. So now I'm in no edit mode, and you see that I have, before I run control states that actually implements the no editing, my little icon here indicates to me that I can edit. Now, when I go back through control states, now it tells me that I no longer can edit. You can see that my buttons are disabled, and if I try to enter something, you'll have to take my word for it that I'm not able to. And I can similarly, so just to kind of show you real time how that works. Any questions about that before we go on? Okay. On to captions. So in my math practice, you see that the caption of my tab is math practice. But when I change the tab to captions, it changes the caption of my tab to fun with captions. And I just wanted to reinforce that this is a really cool way to give user feedback on what, might be lined up in this row of tabs up here. So instead of accounting or account, it might say Johnson account to reflect what record is available on that tab. And you can set this from a subform, any value within the form. And so just wanted to kind of point that out. It's something that I use a lot to help give my users those additional visual cues and kind of soft feedback. This idea is also super useful for reports where the caption can be set to some identifier within the report record. So for instance, I have a client who registers dogs, and when he prints his registration certificates, I can put the certificate number on the print preview window based on the certificate number in the record that he's on and ready to print. So there is that. Questions about that? Okay. Once again, visiting the check mark and the X and this icon, just wanted to touch on this concept in terms of using these kinds of icons. I like to use wingdings. And you've got 3 sets of wingdings and webdings and symbol, and it gives you a huge range of choices. So you can see capital O and P and wingdings too. And it's just a matter of, and then the hand is, I think, a question mark. And it's just a matter of defining a label or a text field. That's all this is. This one's a label. I think these are text fields. Text fields are probably preferable because unassociated labels can contribute to performance issues and also screen flickering if they get crazy. This one's a label, and so you're going to deal with the caption here. And essentially, it's really just a letter in the wingdings alphabet. So it's the question mark in the wingdings alphabet. And my green check mark is a capital P. Now this one's a text box versus a label. So the control source value is set to a capital P in the wingdings 2 alphabet. And the other the cool things about it are that you don't have to manage a bunch of graphic files. They render relatively crisply if you don't make them too large, and you can change the colors really easily. So again, you don't have to manage a bunch of different colored graphic files. So just a little tip that I had about that. Okay, before I move on, anyone want to pipe up with questions or comments or suggestions?
Ms. Taylor, this is Hui again. So you are suggesting that using wingdings, you don't have to kind of download these images and put into Access, because that's what newbie like me will do.
I'm sorry, you're asking me that whether it helps me not have to put what into Access?
So when I see the kind of like the hand with the pen, I thought that you inserted an image, but it turns out that you were using wingdings.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's not a graphic.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a graphic. It's just it's a text field with a letter in it in the wingdings alphabet.
I see. So sometimes you have in the control source equals P. That's what I saw.
Yes.
And then sometimes it's just a question mark. What's the difference?
Right. Okay. So that's the difference between a label and a text box. So this one is a label, and on a label, you have to set the caption. In a text box, you have to set the control source or the value. So in BB code, you would set txt correct equals and a capital P. On a label, you would say LBL edit dot caption equals and then question mark. Okay.
Okay. And these, how do I know that the P is the hand and
Well, you kind of have to have some reference to the Wingdings alphabet. So I just wrote this little table, and it's all the same stuff, except that the fonts are set differently in each column. So
I see.
if I want a plus sign, ends up being what in Wingding 2. So that's how I manage that. You just have to, kind of review the font sets and see what they are.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anyone
Hi,
else?
Yeah,
Yeah,
question with
Linda-
regard to Wingdings and Wingdings 2 and Wingdings 3. Is that 3 different sets of Wingdings or all one Wingding or what?
There are actually three sets of Wingdings font.
And how do we access the different Wingdings font?
Oh, the same way. So, you can set anything to a different font. So I can set this checkbox to a Castellar font, which looks pretty weird, or I can set it to Wingdings.
And is there a Wingdings 1? Oh, I see it now. Yes, got it. So those are 3 separate and distinct fonts. Wingdings.
Yeah, so
Wingdings
see
2,
here you
got
have
it.
Wingdings, Wingdings 2, Wingdings 3, and then you've got Webdings, and then there's also symbols. So I can.
Yeah, that's
if
really cool.
Yeah, so kind of fun.
I also use Wingdings. I've never seen anyone other than me ever use this.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear someone else does too.
My users often have so much information on a screen, like say for invoices, and they really find it helpful if behind the scenes in SQL, I've already written code flagging problems in the invoice. And so, as I said, my invoices, they're really, there's a lot of information there. And so I'll just put a frowny face there, or I'll put a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I use Wingdings all over the place. Skipping ahead to maybe something that you're going to talk about, a lot of times I have record, my users go to a form for different reasons all the time. And at the top of the form, I also will put navigation there so that, they can click on different things and change the sorting in the information that they're seeing. So I might put a Wingdings there that's just like an up and down arrow to just give some indication that something's sortable. So I love this idea.
Great. Well, thanks. I'm happy to hear that validation. I'm not the only crazy person who uses Wingdings.
And I like your table, because what I would do is I would just I have a Word document that shows me what I typically use. And I wish that Microsoft or somebody would offer more font options, because there's some really common font things that I would like to use, like some kind of a symbol for a user. Do you know what I mean? Like a little person. Like you have one up here in the top left corner of your form. Like, well, I don't think that's a Wingdings.
No.
What is it?
No, it's not. That's actually a graphic.
Yes. So every now and then I have to use a graphic, because the fonts available just don't provide a rich enough amount of symbols for what I like to do. But congratulations, I love to see someone else doing that.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear someone else is doing it too. I thought this was kind of good. People were kind of going to go, okay.
No, because, the world's becoming very visual,
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Additional to symbol or wingdings or such things, I use from Sync Fusion. They have a free tool which have graphics, and you can put the graphics into a font, for example.
And this is which tool?
I don't know the name. I think Magic something. From Sync Fusion. If you look in Sync Fusion, you will find it.
Okay, thank you for that.
They have Magic. Oh, I don't know exactly.
All right. Okay. Anything else before we move on?
I went to the tool because I have seen it. That a dashboard has been done. I think it was, I don't know. I don't know who did it. It was a wonderful graphic. And it was all done with that figures from that tool.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Johan de Soto. It was Johan de Soto.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Before we move on? Okay, I want to talk about some size matters. And in this example, I want to talk about the tolerance principle and flexibility, as well as simplicity, and cueing the user into what they can do. So I have a client who wants me to expand the application to fill her new 22-inch screen. And I have to remind her that she has field consultants that are running the same application on 13-inch laptops. So here's a strategy that you can use to accommodate both. What you're looking at here is an example of not good tolerance. And I want to draw your attention over here. This is what I call dueling scroll bars. So you see that if you scroll up on the outer bar, you actually see that this is a bank of tabs. It's a tab control, which disappears when you open the form because of the size of the form and the size of the application. And you scroll down and you scroll down. But the headers disappear when you do that. And if you want to get to the right, you scroll to the right. But if you've got a tab like this one that has a whole bunch of data to the right of this, and it does, the user is really confused about these dueling scroll bars here and really needs to poke around and may not figure it out. So again, the user has to kind of know what they're doing. This is an example of something that really is not intuitive, and may hamper your user's ability to use your application. So an answer to that, a better strategy might be something like this. This is built for a smaller screen. You can see all of the tabs, and even on the tab that has a lot of data, there's no question about how you get from here to there. There's one set of scroll bars up and one set of scroll bars horizontally. So the form is built intentionally small. It's probably smaller than it needs to be. A 13-inch screen might be something like this. But as you just noticed, as I stretch it, it scales up automatically. Now, this concept was introduced to me in 2019 by Anders Ebro. He did a DAAUG presentation for us on layout view. And this was one of the things that he talked about. I think Mr. Pilcher also gave us a talk prior to that where he mentioned, but Ebro really went into the layout view. So do look up Anders 2019, Anders Ebro 2019, the Smiley Coder on our DAAUG YouTube channel. Really good video presentation on some concepts surrounding this. So again, you know, we start with a really small form and we make it stretchable. And let me show you. I have to close this one. It's not the right one. Okay, so here's our nice form in design view. It's really little. So when I first started coding Access, I started using tabs, and I love using tabs. It's a great way to organize information. Oh, I need to show you size matters again. I want to show you something else that happens. On this big form, as I activate the tabs, I want you to notice the position of the subform. It kind of jumps around. But the whole form doesn't jump around. So, you know, the answer to that is to go in and to align all of your subforms every time, which is fine. But then at some point, mid-Access career, I learned about late binding, which is the concept that anytime you have a tab control, you don't want to load all of the subforms on all of the tabs of the tab control when you open the form, because that slows down your performance and eats up your resources. So rather than that, you would, on the forms, on the tabs, on change events, you would go about setting the tab subform control source object to whatever it is you want to display as a subform on that tab. And then at some point it occurred to me, why, if I'm going to utilize the same space and a bunch of subforms, why would I define a whole bunch of controls on a whole bunch of tabs when all I really need is one? So you can see that on this nice tab layout, this is the only subform control that's on there. And so if you define it off of the tab control, it actually bleeds through all of the controls and you only have one control. So you can see here on my my tab change event that I'm setting the exact same control to a different source object on each tab. So in that way, my subform control is always the identical size and position, and there's no jumping around. Now, one other note I want to make about, oh, this one. I need to show you the subform. Okay, so and I can't do that while it's open. On this particular one, this is actually two subforms on a sub-sub, or two sub-subforms on a subform. And as I grow this, you can see that they both grow at the same rate, which is a pretty cool trick, I think. And Anders goes into this, and that is accomplished by, it's kind of hard to see here. I can move this down just a tad. These are actually in a layout grid. So this deal where sorry, you guys. We have to get it where we can grab it. Well, that's better. Okay, so this layout, so you want a stack layout or whatever. And once you have that, you set your anchoring for each subform in the grid to stretch down and across so that they size at exactly the same rate. And so to each one of these, you set the tab control itself to stretch down and across, right? And then also the subform control to stretch down and across. And that's how you can define it really little and make it size pretty darn nicely, even if you have multiple subforms. Okay. Questions on size matters?
Earl said here, you mentioned Anders going in, describing this. Do you recall the topic or how we might zero in
The
on
topic was, it was Anders Ebro, E-B-R-O, and it was a presentation on layout view.
Thank you.
You bet.
One more question. My screen's kind of small. I may have missed it. When you demonstrate the event trigger lets the data change when you switch tabs on the current screen you're looking at there. We're looking at, you're seeing one I guess view when you click on each of those tabs, but the underlying data is changing.
The underlines?
Underlying data is changing because it looks like it's that case statement that you got there that's doing the work.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. It's just a tiny bit garbled for me.
Sure. Yeah, the data is changing as you're changing tabs, and I'm getting
right. So these are just different. This is all from the same table, but they're kind of different. You know, different subforms. Each one is a different subform.
But earlier you were describing these as all having. Is it the same frame that they're
yeah.
in?
So you know when you pull a subform onto a form, it's actually two things. There's a control, and then within the control is the actual subform or a reference to it. So I can call this Jack. And Jack still has a source object that is the person subform, the person diagnosis DS subform. So that's all this is. This is the equivalent of Jack. The CTL person is a container that's going to contain whatever we define as the source object. So I can say, I don't know if I can do this twice on one form, so I'm going to delete this. So I could say this source object is persons diagnosis DS. Now that's not going to stick because when it goes through, but so do you understand that?
I believe so. I'm not.
Yeah, it doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter now what the container is. Doesn't matter what the container is. And it is a little bit confusing because when you pull a subform onto a form, Access automatically names the container, which is actually the control, and that's what this other name is. That's the control name. And the actual report itself is the source object for that. So here is one of those containers with no source object, and I just define the source object depending on what tab I click. Make sense?
Yes, so it's all done through the property sheet. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's done on the tab change event. So when I click demographic in my tab change event, if I hit the demographic page, the control person object, which is this container, source object, which is this value, becomes this person demographics DS subform, which is that.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You bet. Okay.
Hey, Earl, real quickly, if you can get into the Zoom chat, there's a link in there to the YouTube channel where you can find Anders' presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.
Additional info. I have sometimes problems if changing source of object. I think you have to, in VBA, you have to add the link fields as well.
Yeah,
Subform.
it depends if your subforms are linked by a key ID of some sort. So if you have a form subform and you're populating the subform, then yeah, you may need to set your link master and child fields as well, and you can do that in VBA.
Yeah, you have to do it because if you have by chance the same field name in the subform and in the main form, then sometimes Access automatically binds that, and you don't want that.
Yeah, it does. But other times, yeah, you do need to set it implicitly.
Yeah, explicit.
Or explicitly, I mean, yeah. I said implicitly and I thought, no, that's not right. You have to set it explicitly sometimes. But in this case, I don't have a form subform and a parent-child relationship. So so I don't really need to, you know, and the idea is really more about the presentation of the form, at least in this case. We're actually going to look at something in a minute.
I personally make the form always maximize and use that scaling always to the with that left and right and top and down that binding. both. So that you automatically, the form grows, even if it's a normal, even always if it's such a subform.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
This is Hui. I have just one probably last question.
Mhm.
And so I think you have selection type as a page here. What is it? I have never seen it.
I have what again? Sorry.
So if you go to design view and then it's like a container, it says selection type is a page. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Right.
so this is a tab control. So I can just pop another one on here so you can see it. It's just this thing, this tab control. Boom.
Ah, that's nice. I thought that you insert a bunch of buttons here, and then when you click something change, but it seems that this is tab control much simpler than inserting a bunch of buttons.
Yeah, there are benefits and disadvantages to tab controls, but
Okay.
they're a great way to organize information. I use them a lot.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Bet. Okay, let's move on to from size matters to something about better messaging. Okay, so this is kind of a great analogy. We have a parent record, which is parent, and we have child records, which are children. And one thing I wanted to point out, this is very visual illustration of this, but I want to point out and reinforce that oftentimes users working with a record, a parent record that may have child records or may have other records that are linked with referential integrity. And I wanted to illustrate this kind of cryptic message that you get when you try to delete a parent record when there are child records and referential integrity is enforced as you want it to be. This is a stock message out of Access, and actually this is error handled. If I just didn't even error handle it, it would be even uglier. But it tells me the record cannot be deleted because table, and then it says pipe includes related records. Well, imagine you're, Joe average user. Usually this pipe would indicate table child or something like that. But oftentimes databases contain tables with really cryptic names like ARCUSFIL_SQL. So imagine user getting the message, the record cannot be deleted or changed because table ARCSUFIL_SQL includes related records. What? So I want to, let's see. I think that's the one. No, that's not the one. Need to find the right. Okay, here we go. So on our command delete event, we're again handling and just presenting the default error, but instead let's give the user just a little bit more help. And now when we try to delete Lavinia, we get a message that instead says parent Lavinia cannot be deleted because doing so would orphan Inky, Joe, and Stinky, Lavinia's children. And we could go even one better maybe. By giving the message not in a pop-up, but in, you know, our reserved message area in our application. And as I navigate from record to record, that clears because we're not concerned about Lavinia now. We're concerned about Foghorn Leghorn. And finally, we get to a record with no children, and we just delete. You'll notice that I didn't get the message, you are about to delete this record, it's going to be permanent, do you really want to do this? Use your judgment on, I oftentimes will suppress that depending on what they're doing. Something minor and insignificant, I usually will suppress the message because oftentimes they'll, the user's just annoyed by that. Yes, I want to delete the record. I just clicked the delete button. So, anyway, so in the end, we're giving the user some concise feedback that informs them of what they can or cannot do in as unobtrusive a manner as possible in language that really makes sense to them. So that's my message on better messaging. The last thing I want to show you is something about tab madness, which is a reference back to in the presentation. I showed you that crazy tab that showed that was very crowded. So this is that type of a control. And you can see here that, and I promise you, these pages are defined 1 through 13, but they will arrange themselves on this control however they see fit. So you see the first page 1 through 4 is on the bottom row, 5 through 10 is on the top row, and page 10 through 13 is on the middle row. Not very intuitive. So kind of a nightmare for the developer who's trying to give you a, you know, a consistent interface. And then the worst thing about this to me is that if I select, let's say, page 8 from the top row, that whole row jumps down to the bottom. The bottom row is pushed up 1, and then the middle row is pushed up 1. So these tabs all get rearranged. I think this is really disconcerting. Plus, you can't use any styles here. You're pretty much stuck with this. If you use, for instance, let me show you. This is actually just a regular tab control like we saw before. But you can see it's set to multi-row. Multi-row does not work if you use themes. If I change this theme to use theme, it's no longer going to be a multi-row, which means that you can't set colors and, you know, do modernizing of the design. And again, additionally, my page order, I promise you, is in order 1 through 13, and yet it still renders itself however it wants to. So to me, this violates the principle of simplicity in that it's kind of a series of who moved my cheese moments. So for me, it's not intuitive, and it plays to the user as inconsistent and gives your app kind of a broken feeling. So here might be, and somewhere in here, an alternative. Again, this scales, and essentially it's not a tab control, it's a bank of buttons. But when I activate tab 6, it stays where it was. Page 10, it stays where it was. Nothing, goes moving around, and everything stays put when they're activated. Plus, using our stretchability and flexibility concepts, we can still make sure that it's an attractive form and that everything kind of aligns and is in its place, and still, where the user is accustomed to finding it. Okay. So, any questions on this tab arrangement? No? Well, I think that's it. As far as the demonstration, I hope that this inspires us to think about making ways to make the user experience better, and considering how we give user feedback, whether we do so with simplicity and some ways to improve application flexibility and tolerance to give the user a better experience and a better feeling about our applications. So I will finish that. I will hand the mic over to anybody who has questions or comments.